Thank you, Joanna, for the invitation. I'm really going to try to stick to the time, even though I put here a lot of impetus precisely to see where the discussion might go. And I was quite interested in the discussion around pedagogies, because so to say we could come here, make our statement, say, I believe in this and so on, but that's not maybe a very strong point. The point is how what we know might be useful and how it's even translatable to, in this case, a field. So I find that a very interesting framework in that sense. I'm going to go through three kind of episodes that relate to my research. I think a little bit fast, given that maybe the article, and that at least some people here have read it, and I can just pass by this characterization of the growth. But
maybe a couple of students online have read it.
What I mean by that is that I will just describe briefly what I've done and pose some, what I hope is relevant questions for the discussion. The first one is a very general question that I wonder whether young practitioners and architects or even academics, I wonder what people consider. So what is a material healthy city? So what is a healthy city or a sustainable city from a material perspective? Is it one that has very little heating, a lot of heating, very tall buildings, very small buildings? And when we look at cities, and this is the one that I got from Google today, from Eindhoven, I would say, this looks like a nice city. It has green. There are places for bikes. So we have, my impression is that we have a very relatively superficial idea of how do we think cities are healthy or good. If buildings they look modern and efficient, if you can take a bike, if there are public spaces, that's a good city. I'm going to present a different view of this, which I put with the example of sweets, which I love. Like I think almost anybody likes. And I try to keep away from home because if I have them home, I eat them. I eat them like constantly, like in a very systematic level. Sweets are very nice and so on, and you could say that it's very easy to identify them. You eat them, and then you can feel energized and so on. But we know that sweets are not good. Having too many are not good, not only for the teeth. They're very good for dentists, but very bad for your teeth. But on a more abstract level, they are bad for an illness that is called diabetes, which you don't see in the people. They walk in the street. They might look very nice, but they have a problem. That problem is, for example, increasing. In Germany, the amount of people with diabetes is around 6 million out of a country of 80 million. It's a big thing. Though you have a lot of supermarkets, and now in Christmas time, you have an overflow of sweets everywhere. The visibility of the problem is actually quite interesting because it doesn't have to do with what people do with the bars, with the supermarkets, but it's actually an illness that is stored in a very humble organ, which is the pancreas. The pancreas not only is there, if you cut open a pancreas, you will not see it, but you have to look at something called beta cells in the pancreas and see their performance depending on how you take sugar, and there are two different patterns, and we could go on and on and on. So basically, the idea is that healthy cities don't need to be necessarily nice cities, and sustainable cities, they don't need to be nice cities, but they might be something different depending on how you look at health or at sustainability. And what I'm looking at is at cities from a purely material perspective. What are these things that are on the crust of the planet? This is something not new. This is a map from Patrick Abercrombie for the Greater London Plan, 1943, imagining the city as an organism that is evolving and growing and so on. But if you take this material perspective, one might look at cities slightly differently. Now, how cities and healthy cities, and I would say, I'm calling healthy, say, sustainability, like a normative notion of a good city, a sustainable cities, the way that we understand them now, not only in Eindhoven, but the city of Dresden, when you look at it, fantastic, as greenery, there's a river, an old bridge that has been preserved, all of it is fantastic. What is the normative idea of what a sustainable city is? Well, we don't have a body of a collegiate school of doctors and so on that discuss about it. And I would even challenge to say that there is no theory of it. There are theories about it. I think there are discourses about it. And what I have been looking through my research is the discourses of sustainability within architectural production. And I would claim that the dominant discourse for sustainability, what health is eco-modernism, is the very assumption that Anna just mentioned, that economic growth is something positive when coupled with high-tech industrialization because it can provide social equity and even reduce environmental harm. This is not something a couple of people with black jackets thought in a room, but it's something that comes throughout the 20th century. Particularly, there is, for those, to give a little bit of context, aligned with modernization theory, this might come from what is called the Kuznets curve. Kuznets, a Nobel Prize from the US, that coined and kind of organized what we call now GDP, so it's kind of accounted for how many assets a country has, found in historical research that he did in the United States that between the late second urban industrialization and the 1950s, the growth of income grew in the country and producing the following curve. At the beginning, it increased inequality, and after a critical point, it decreased inequality. This gave the idea in the Cold War that democracy and capitalism are great because you will grow economically. At the beginning, it will be tough, but then when you become modern, you will redistribute wealth by the mere fact of democracy. And that's something you say you could look. The first phase is poor Manchester or Birmingham, from the 19th century. And I could not find, this is the image of that area nowadays, completely unrelated. Very nice area, not smoke, not cold. Really?
I used to be there for research some years ago.
Oh, wow.
It's one of the most beautiful parts of Birmingham.
So modernization works. This was in 1890, and now this is this beautiful place. The way the environmental discourse has taken this is by making a parallelism with environmental degradation. The idea is that in pre-industrial economies, you have increasing industrial production that requires pollution, and after a critical tipping point, efficiency gains in industries will reduce environmental degradation, will decouple growth and environmental degradation. It's usually said on relative terms, meaning it will be more efficient. So it will be more efficient per gram, or it will be more productive. It will cost more money per gram, so you will use less grams, and or it will be more CO2 efficient, so less CO2 produced per gram. In part of the work that I've done, I've tried to look at post-growth literature and also general sustainability blockbuster books on architectural sustainability to find what are the archetypes by scale of this eco-modern architecture. And this is a bit of a heuristic research, obviously, but there is some general idealization that we got that at the level of construction, it has to do with high-tech construction and industrial upcycling. This is with the example of Singapore Botanical Gardens, which have a wonderful weather of subtropical cold forests in the equator line, and somehow it's sustainable because the AC system is super efficient. At a building level, it has to do with the incorporation of nature in facades, the famous project for the Bosco Vertical from Bury, and then at the urban level, eco-villages and smart cities. I'm not going to stop in them. So that is where the normative dominant discourse is. However, there are some suspicious data that come when we look at the materiality of cities, not so much to the relative efficiency of new cities. If you look at Germany, consumes 66 hectares of new land every day for a population that is barely increasing. It increases the living floor per dweller, even though families are not bigger average. We produce 6 tons of construction waste per person in a year. And buildings last very little, even those that are modern. So from a material perspective, we are producing and excreting a lot of matter. From a material perspective, even very high efficient homes like this famous house from Werner Sobeck is located in a place with extremely low, it's on the middle of the, in some middle, I think middle top of the image. It's in a very suburban area, which means that it's a very efficient house in a very low efficient settlement that requires a lot of piping, cables, lines, roads, asphalt, etc. So the material consumption, not the relative efficiency, but the absolute material consumption is to be doubted. Yet it's something that is not so easy to be seen. It might be super green, but it might be yet digesting a lot of materials. Indeed, recent research has tried to compare how much anthropogenic mass that produced by humans weights compared to biomass. Don't ask me exactly how this was calculated. One could gauge, the research papers are there. And the research came to a very shocking realization, which is that anthropogenic mass weighs much more than biogenic mass, meaning all plants and animals together are lighter than all what we have produced in history. And the interesting thing for us is that the author says that maybe approximately 50% has to do with construction. If you look at the diagram, which I turned because it's very big, almost a third is concrete, almost 1/6 is bricks, another third is aggregates, which include cements and sand, and then you have metals and asphalt, which is another 1/10. It's a lot of matter that we are digesting and producing and excreting, which are compatible with efficiency gains, but not with absolute material construction. Last but not least, so in post-growth or critical economic theories have been revising these assumptions of ecomodernism. Thomas Piketty, which you might have probably heard, analyzed the continuation on the Kuznets curve. So what happened with income distribution after the 1970s? And yes, the income inequality rised up, which means that there is no natural distribution of or redistribution of wealth through growth, but actually the opposite can happen. Giorgos Kallis, a very renowned scholar, and David Hickel, they have published recently another research paper, very interesting, saying that green growth, there is no evidence that green growth is happening. When you look at the GDP and the right and material use, they are very much correlated. So the more GDP, the more materials you consume. And when you look at absolute material consumption per country, including Scandinavian, very high advanced regions, countries are consuming more matter day by day. So the critique is a bit obvious. Try to be faster. The point, or what I am trying to bring my research now, is to analyze the landscapes that provide those materials for cities: asphalt, cement, steel, etc. And it's hard to know where to stop, because basically it's not that materials are taken from landscape, but entire landscapes are materials. If you think about it, in the production of materials, water is quintessential. So we don't know how much water is required as aggregate in the German construction sector, but definitely you can imagine that probably the numbers are extremely high. I know that this is very close to Dresden. There is a large amount of the gravel that is being extracted around Germany is for the production of infrastructure construction in areas. We know that for the mobility of cities, we need not only the cars and the materials for cars, but we need the entire superficial infrastructure for the accumulation of cars, distribution of cars. We need this famous image of the lithium mines. We need to go farther and extract the materials that will become cars, and we need to provide the landscape that will be the leftover of cars. And last but not least, we need some mining for some materials that are produced. In particular, in my work, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to carry out a material flow analysis of iron from Brazil to Germany to establish how much of the steel in German buildings comes from Brazil, from two regions, Minas Gerais and Pará. The assumption is, and this is a very interesting question, is that in the future, I would like to see what is the historical aggregate of imports of steel in German cities outside of Germany, meaning how much of our cities rely in the, beton, Stahlbeton, so in the age of the structural steel, how much of that age is European or German? I'm thinking Netherlands probably doesn't have a lot of area to extract steel. So there is a historical question about the materiality of construction. Where do cities materially come from? It's a long story. I hope that I can share this discussion with you. I'm trying to really find partners for several elements, but it's a bit of a quantitative thing. So If that's a problem, post-growth or degrowth as a heuristic offers some frugal alternative to that. In a nutshell, what it tries is not opposed to efficiency. Efficiency is wonderful, but it proposed an absolute downscaling of resource consumption. So it proposes a democratic downscaling of production so that wealth, and means resources, can be distributed where they are needed. So places that don't have trains can have trains, and places that do have a lot of trains, they can reuse the trains or learn to recycle and so on, and try to decommodify wealth as a way to reduce the throughput or reduce the metabolism of cities. So rather than churning materials into a circular economy that goes faster and faster, to say the only thing we can do to reduce entropy is reduce the flow of materials. That's why they use sufficiency as a strategy compared to efficiency. They talk about convivial technologies, frugal innovations, which are terms that relate to simple ways of operating with materials. And of course, they relate to behavioral change. In the research that we did in our institute in the past, we looked for literature in degrowth efficiency to try to find how degrowth scholars have specialized those characteristics in cities. And we came up with this characterization by scale, from a construction level on the top, in the middle to a building or neighborhood level to a city level. And as you can see here, we identified some phrases of when a project could be seen as aligned to growth or green growth and when to degrowth. Rather than going in detail here, I will just pass by quickly. Also, my time is coming. At the urban level, deurbanization is one of the strategies that has been seen in Barcelona. It's happening very little by little as a way to reduce car traffic, the commercialization of space, produce social areas, open, so nature-based solutions, etc., etc. I mean, there are many cases, but some of the ones that we identified, like Adona Vassal de Place de Lenecoq, this is a historical project that one should look at. It is one of the first projects where architects proposed nothing, so to say, and they won. So they said the best thing you could do to renovate this plaza is keep it as it is. Just please get rid of the cars and move the garbage to another corner. They won the competition, and the cars on the top image came back because after 10 years, the people were shouting, "We need our cars." They do also building renovations. They might be a famous project that would have a lot of story. But there are other interventions. So I think that there is a high room for creativity here. Building typologies don't need to be either demolished or preserved, but there are intermediate areas to change typologies to semi-villa spaces with more light and more space. Buildings can be made out of building parts. It can be recycled, reused, as we have here. The building of the left from Baburo is very interesting. There is, at the material level, a lot of investigation now how to use, I don't know how to call this in English, as schneepolchen or, this hay construction and mud construction. Straw bale, yeah. And then there is, from the material construction, there are some very creative kind of experimental exercises. In some more real works that I would recommend, Rotor in Belgium is a very interesting practice, really trying to make a business out of dismantling buildings. In Germany also there is new initiatives with a site called Concular. It's kind of an eBay for building parts that is kind of working. However, what we see, even though there are some very famous practices, we are a bit, so this is where it's hard, because it's very hard to move away from structural steel, in the sense that for insurance purposes and density purposes, it's very hard to know who will insure a building that is not really, following the regulations of structural steel. As you see here, this is a famous building that I am still uncertain after having researched whether it has concrete inside or not, even though it says that it's been done very nicely. I mean, I'm sure that the architect really tried to experiment, but I have not seen the section of every element, and that's the ultimate part. But you see Herzog de Meuron, for example, in second Ricola Croeta Centrum, done with earthworks, and yes, it's done with earthworks mixed with cement with a structural steel. So there is a lot of challenges, but also I find there is a whole new pedagogical field to develop. How do you become creative if the constraints are that you want to reduce the absolute amount of matter that you circulate? That is something interesting. The last part, and I'm over my time, this will be very short. It's about some remaining challenges to this field. Like it sounds, we would say after the second part, we say, so you have the world for you, just do it and then do new buildings. It will work out fantastically. I tried myself out of self-esteem. I went to for a competition with some colleagues in a city which name I will not name, but it will be perfectly fine. We lost it. So I am advancing what is the end of this. We lost the competition. And then, so it was from the 50s, 60s, a city that was based on car traffic, very gray. People hated it. The neighbors, there was a survey for the neighbors. They wanted to be pedestrian, no more buildings, please. We just want a place where we can be together, just as simple as it sounds. And we thought, well, this is a perfect place to make a competition on degrowth. So there I went with my colleagues, and we said, let's do a competition on degrowth that is explicitly on degrowth or sufficiency. We call it, the title was "Small is Beautiful" in the local language, so that they know it. So it's really about that. This is before and after. And we basically did is try to keep all the buildings that we could, try to de-urbanize things like following the scheme, reuse materials to recycle them inside, and put the program in the corners we could, so that changing the height of the asphalt in cases so that people could not trip. Very basic things, and we did some images of how it would look, etc. And other things won, and I'm very happy for this. But it was very interesting that the jury named, and now in my sound, there we go, the architect that is, feeling aggravated. The interesting thing, it was really for me a way to test what will they say if all of this is good and it goes with the population. What will be the answer? The interesting thing is that the jury said in the part of innovations, it says nothing. They wrote the word nothing. They said it doesn't propose anything. There is no added value. This one won, and as you can see, it looks very nice. There is a building here on the top, and that's another building, and there are other buildings there. They occupy on the top left the green area that was unused that the neighbors wanted to protect. So the interesting thing is that it's not just important to try to do things with less material, but there is another gap, which is we're trying to figure out, is trying to express why those things are really relevant. The way that I name it is, why is that better than the green mushroom? That you make a big mushroom that, say, put some plant on top and say, oh, it's great, it's green, and it's a mushroom. With the idea of the major building with underground parking that is very sustainable. So in principle, you say, the people is not ready, we are too advanced and so on. But then we realize that, well, maybe we don't know how to represent these ideas, meaning that the plant is not useful. Maybe the section is not useful. But how do we communicate that this is better than the green mushroom? Like, what are the visual means and the argumentative elements that we can use? On top is the image of the diagram we did there, where we try to see what we keep, the floor, that we remain, and so on. After the competition, we redid it with a different categorization, as if we identify sealed areas, new sealed area, resealed, unsealed, building interventions, like what is the vocabulary that we need to create in education so that these things can be visible in part of our documentation. So my last slide would be that, as simple as it sounds, I do think that this is not a thesis and thesis discussion. This is an argumentative discussion. So it's not like post-growth is better than growth, but it's rather that we need to learn what arguments can post-growth make and what are the evidence for it, because I see that it's not so clear, even though it sounds like a very good idea. Thank you very much for your generosity after my 5 minutes of extra time. Thank you.